Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I have with me today Ambassador Shyam Saran. He's the former Foreign Secretary of India and he's also the former Chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Welcome to ThePrint, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, to start off, of course, the focus is now on 1 year of Galwan. We've heard and we've seen, we've also read reports, at least from the perspective of media, as to what had happened on that fateful night of 15th June to 2020. So 1 year now, we are now also in the middle of June. We have completed 1 year. We've seen within this 12 months, many things have changed between India and China. India has gone ahead and done the Quad Summit as well, which many are looking at it as aligning more towards the US. India has stated that ties with China will not be normal like before unless there is peace and tranquility at the border area. So my first question to you, sir, will be 1 year down the line, except for Pangong Tso area, we've seen that the friction points remain the same. What do you think went wrong as far as the disengagement process is concerned?
I can't say that, the disengagement process has gone wrong. Certainly, there is no doubt that it is taking much longer than perhaps we might have anticipated. I think there was a kind of, optimism that we were able to resolve the Pangong Tso area issue. And there were also statements by both sides as if we were now able to move to resolving some of the lesser issues pertaining to, say, the Depsang Plain or the hot spring area. But that has not happened. And I think perhaps you might recall that this question was asked of me soon after Pangong Tso as to whether or not this means that we have turned the corner. And I said that we will have to wait and see whether or not, the follow-up steps are taken. So far, those follow-up steps have not been taken by either side. And while I would say from one's own experience of the past, that in dealing with these issues, particularly with China, you need to have patience. You need to persevere, with your engagement, with your talks. So I would hope that that process will continue, because I don't think we should give up so easily and say, well, this is it, nothing is going to happen. In these kind of matters, it sometimes does take quite some time and a lot of, talking back and forth before we are able to come to some kind of a conclusion. So I would not give up so easily, but I would certainly say it is a matter of concern that despite having, being able to resolve the Pangong Tso lake area, successfully and very rapidly, as you saw, we have not been able to, take the process forward with as much speed as we had anticipated. So we are at that point where I think, we have to try and assess what is it that is, in a sense, preventing China from going ahead with what has been a positive process. And my sense is that, on the Chinese side, they are perhaps looking at, okay, if we do this, what are we going to get in return? What is it that will make it worthwhile for us to, in fact, what they think would be a concession on our part, in terms of the disengagement. I don't think it would be a concession on their part, but I think their own thinking is that, we have some bargaining chips in our hand, and why should we give those up unless we have something of value which is given to us in return? And I think this is where perhaps we are stuck.
Mm-hmm. So you said that some of the follow-up activities that both sides did not do. What did you mean by that?
No, follow-up in terms of what they had already committed themselves to. That, okay, we have been able to resolve the Pangong Tso lake area. That's a very positive step. And now we should be able to do the others, Depsang and, Gogra and Hot Spring area without too much difficulty, because they were expected to be lesser issues than the Pangong Tso area issue. As far as the Depsang area is concerned, for example, what is really the issue is our patrols not being allowed to go to where our conception of the LAC is. Whereas we used to go in the past, they had earlier made an attempt, if you recall, to do the same thing. We had I think, a standoff in Depsang area, if I'm not mistaken, in 2000, maybe 16, or, sorry, 2013, which we managed to resolve. There also, they had stopped our patrols from going to the points, patrolling points that we used to visit. Then it was, that particular problem was resolved. Their patrols were coming, to where they say their, perception of LAC is. Our patrols were going to where we say the perception of the LAC is. Now the situation is that we are sort of confronting one another, but the main issue is that we are not able to mount the patrols which we used to in the past. Mm-hmm. And until that happens, there is no, therefore, the restoration of status quo ante.
Mm-hmm. So one question that is being asked all the time, and a doubt that people have in their mind, is there have been several rounds of military discussions at diplomatic level. We've seen even ministers meeting in Russia. The Ministry of External Affairs came out with something like a Moscow agreement, the 5-point agenda between External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Now, despite all of this, why do you think the disengagement process took time? Are we also seeing this to be a long-drawn process, like what we saw in the case of the Sundarongchu experience?
Well, it could be. I mean, it's difficult to predict, how long this will take. But as you gave the example of Sundarongchu, after all, it took almost 10 years to actually resolve that issue. So we have faced situations in the past where it has actually taken a fairly long time for us to be able to reach some kind of a compromise. Will this be a similar case? I don't know. But it is certainly true that the expectation that we had after resolving the Pangkung Lake issue, which, as I said, was a more complicated issue. So the expectation was that we would be able to move ahead fairly quickly with the other pending issues. That has not happened, and therefore the question does arise: why has it not happened? So one explanation, of course, is precisely because the Pangkung Lake area issue was a more sensitive issue for the Chinese. They were certainly very much, in a sense, driven to try and resolve this quickly. But now that issue, more difficult issue, having been resolved, maybe the perception on the Chinese side is, well, we can afford to wait out as far as the other remaining issues are concerned, hoping that in trying to resolve those issues, India may be ready to deliver something of value to them. For example, we have taken the position that, we cannot divorce what is happening at the border from the rest of the relationship. That peace and tranquility on the border is, in a sense, a precondition for being able to take the rest of the relationship forward, which is precisely what we were doing in the past. We were very proud to say that, for the last so many years, not a shot has been fired on at the border, and that this is one of our most peaceful borders. We cannot say that now. So we have taken the position that if you really want the relationship to get back to an even keel, then it is very important that the peace and tranquility on the border, which has been disturbed, it must be restored. And in restoring that, of course, the pending issues with respect to the remaining areas of confrontation must be resolved. Now, the Chinese side has been insisting that even though we have some of these issues at the border, we should not let that come in the way of, taking the relationship forward in other areas. As far as, say, the economic and commercial relationship is concerned, or being able to work together on certain global issues like public health. There is a pandemic which is ongoing. Can we not work together on that? There is the whole climate change issue. We have worked together with each other in the past on that. and quite successfully. Why can't we do the same thing? Because climate change is becoming a major issue. These are important global issues on which India and China can work together. We have not agreed to that position. We have said that our ability to do that is linked to your observing what are actually long-standing protocols, long-standing agreements between our two sides with respect to maintaining peace and tranquility, which you have discovered.
So do you think that this is probably the time to look at the mechanisms with which we have managed border standoffs in the past? Why I'm asking this is because in that 5-point agenda that Minister Jaishankar and Minister Wang had agreed, the last point was on reviewing the confidence building measures. Now this time that has been questioned a lot, also on the fact that during the Galwan clash firearms were not used. All these things need to be reviewed. So do you think it needs an updation, or do you think that whatever is there is perfect, one needs to just follow them?
Well, I mean, even if we have to do an updation of those confidence building measures, that can only happen once we manage to, at least get back to, as the Indian side says, to status quo ante. As I said, it is the Chinese side which has disturbed the status quo, and it is therefore the responsibility of the Chinese side to create an environment in which some of these matters can be, in fact, discussed and resolved through bilateral negotiations. Yes, there could be a case for updating those protocols. Why? Because, those protocols were concluded at a time when many of the areas that we are talking about, very infrequently would patrols be able to go, because the terrain is very difficult. During the winter months, any kind of movement becomes very difficult, as we have seen. So there have been large areas along the border where there were infrequent patrols by either side. So the confidence building measures or protocols were designed to take care of those situations where once in a while an Indian patrol would come face to face with a Chinese patrol. So how do we handle a situation like that? Now, handling that situation, it was agreed that, number one, we should not use arms, we should not display arms, we should make our point, maybe hold up a placard to say this is our territory, and each side then decides to go back. They don't tag each other, for example, don't follow each other. Now, that was okay for a time when the encounters between the patrols of the two sides were very infrequent. Now, if you now have a situation where there has been an improvement of infrastructure on our side, there has been much better, improvement in infrastructure on the Chinese side. Therefore, number one, we are visiting areas where we were hardly, ever mounting patrols in the past. Now we are visiting many more areas than in the past. We are able to mount many more patrols than we did in the past. So maybe from that point of view, we may need to try and see, okay, we are dealing with a somewhat new situation, and how do we try to deal with the possibility of much more frequent contact between the two sides than was the case in the past. But the one thing that we have to recognize is not merely a question of the two sides being in confrontation, but we also see that there is a large amount of buildup by the Chinese side on their side of the border. Not only, say, in the rear area, but also in the base areas. So it seems as if there is going to be a great sort of increase in the kind of preparedness, in the kind of level of, the kind of armaments, heavy armaments, for example, on the other side. And therefore, we have had to respond with build-up on our side as well. Now, disengagement is not only in terms of the points of confrontation, but disengagement really means that, the kind of build-up which has been taking place should also be reduced. That is not happening.
Mhm. So in this 1 year, do you think now that, both sides are present with heavy troops there, do you think China has been able to make any sort of territorial or strategic gains there? What is your analysis, sir?
Well, the gains which China has made is not specifically with respect to the border. It is with respect to the greater asymmetry of power that has developed between India and China over the last several years. So there is no doubt that China today is a much more powerful country than, say, 5 years in the past or 10 years in the past. Not only in terms of economic capabilities, but also in terms of military capabilities. And the dilemma that we are facing is that we have to deal with an adversary who over this period of time has become much more powerful than we are. So reason why the border issue is a troubling issue is when you put it in the context of that asymmetry. So I think what we have to recognize is that we are faced with a difficult challenge because of that overall context of the relationship, an overall context where there is a growing asymmetry of power between the two sides. And until we are seen as shrinking that gap, our diplomatic options get somewhat limited. So that is the reason why the importance of, greater coherence of a body like, say, the Quad, because what we are basically trying to do is external balancing by, having strong security arrangements with countries which are as concerned about the unilateral assertion of power by China just as we are. But I repeat this again and again, that the only credible answer to the China challenge is really the buildup of our own capabilities. That is the, if you are looking at the longer term, that is the answer to this problem. And in that sense, India, given its size, India, given the fact that it's as civilizational a state as China is, it has a lot of potential in terms of its economic capabilities, in terms of its security capabilities, also its technological capabilities. If there is one country which has the potential to actually catch up with China, it is only India. But for that, there are very important and very difficult decisions which are required at home.
Right.
That is, how do we make certain that we get back to a high growth trajectory? How do we fix our governance issue so that some of the limitations in terms of our being able to, for example, develop a indigenous arms building capability, a weapons capability, all those governance gaps that we have, we need to fix that. Only then can we really have a credible opportunity to be able to deal with this dilemma. So the border issue should be seen as a reflection, as a symptom of that larger, challenge that we are facing.
Mm-hmm. So, but then do you think that in a post-pandemic, I would not even say post-pandemic, we're looking at probably at a third wave, when the economy is in such a condition, do you think building capabilities will be easy, at least in the next 10 years?
No, it will not be easy. At any time, it would not be easy. And as you say, the pandemic has delivered a major setback to our economy, and it will take some time to recover from that. But I would not say that, it will take 10 years. Because the ingredients for success are there. It is not that those ingredients are missing in the country. Those attributes are there. It's a question of how do you marshal them together. So also, it is not necessary that in order to be able to deal with this challenge, you must become immediately as powerful as China. If you are seen over the next 10 years, for example, as significantly shrinking the power gap between the two countries, that itself will be a very important signal. Because even if you see the period, say, from 2003 to 2007, it is not as if the asymmetry was not there between India and China. China was still much more powerful than India was. But what was the difference then? The difference then was that we were actually seen as shrinking the gap between India and China. Because we were growing at the rate of 9% per annum, 10% per annum for a few years. So the world was looking at us as even the next China. That even though it is not today equal to China, but it is very quickly shrinking the gap between the two sides. So if we can even get back to that situation where we are actually seen as shrinking that gap between the two countries, that itself will multiply our diplomatic options.
So, well, I completely agree to that. But do you think in the short term, to get out of this condition that we are in right now with the Ladakh standoff, do you think now that both the leaders should intervene, and maybe the upcoming BRICS summit will throw up some sort of opportunity? That's what some people are saying, because we've seen the ministers can achieve this much, the military senior commanders can achieve this much, and so are the diplomats. They've done everything that they could. Do you think now is the time when probably both leaders should speak to each other?
Well, depends upon whether or not there is the political will to try and come to some kind of an understanding. A mere meeting between the two leaders need not necessarily, lead to an agreement. After all, you have two highly publicized informal summits, one in Wuhan and then in Mamallapuram. The general sort of a perception was that the two countries actually have reached a good understanding between their leaders. So when you had Ladakh happening, it came as a surprise.
Right.
Now, I would also say that what happened in Ladakh, a major kind of an event like that, would not have taken place without sanction from the highest echelons of the Chinese leadership. So we should not make a mistake that this is some local incident or this is something which was done by some local commanders. No, I think this had very clearly a sanction at the highest level of the Chinese leadership. If it did not have, they would have by now tried to resolve it.
Okay.
The fact that they have continued with this means that there is a kind of a decision that in this kind of context of international relations, we are better placed to really sort of put India down, in the sense of making the world realize, making India realize that you are simply not in the same league as China. You should know your place. So it's a projection of how China sees the new Asian order. It would like Asian countries to recognize that the hierarchy in Asia is, whether you like it or not, headed by China. And that countries who try to resist it or try to confront it, they will suffer the consequences thereof.
Okay.
So there is a certain mindset behind it, and I do not think that a mere summit between the two leaders, even if it's a very pleasant meeting, I do not think that by itself that would resolve the problem. As I said, in that meeting, if there is something that India, in terms of a concession, comes forward, like for example, okay, let us resume our economic and trade relationship. All the sanctions that we have had, or limitations that we have put on trade or on investment, we are removing that. After all, this is what the Chinese demand is, in a sense.
Right.
Are you ready to do that? And are you ready to also accept that we will not insist that we return to the status quo ante on the border? So these are important issues which we have to decide before that summit takes place. The summit may be a very pleasant get-together, but it need not necessarily resolve the problem. So we should not fall into the trap of thinking that a summit is an answer to the problem. I do not think that. And more important is what would make a summit like that successful from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So if the summit is successful only after we make the concessions, then obviously it is it is not something that I would welcome. I would rather that we stand our ground and say, sorry, you have to resolve the issues that have become current because of your actions. You have to take back those actions.
Mm-hmm. So also now next month, in the month of July, it will be 100 years completion of the Chinese Communist Party. They've ruled for about 70 years now. How do you think, and under the leadership of President Xi Jinping, what stance do you think that the party will now take in the next, let's say, 50 or 100 years?
Well, from whatever I can see from the Chinese media, Chinese press, and some of the statements which are coming out, it is a anniversary which is looking like a very triumphal march of the Chinese Communist Party. That this is evidence, if evidence was needed, that the Communist Party of China actually has been the instrument for the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and its return to the status of a world power. So triumphalism is the running theme with respect to this anniversary. And there are two elements to it. One is the material element. That is, we are already a country which is a major economic power. We have achieved what they call a sort of a modest level of economic development. We have managed to completely eradicate poverty from our country, which is a great achievement. We have become a major technological power. For example, the space journey to the moon and then to Mars. The rover being landed on the Mars, there are very important scientific and technological achievements that they have made. So all this is to show that materially speaking, China is already a very, very major economic and technological power, as well as a military power. But the other element of this is the ideological element. That is, if we are looking at what works, what is more efficient in terms of a political dispensation. What China has been able to demonstrate is that it is not the liberal democracy of the kind of Western flavor that the United States of America represents. That is not what works in the new era. What works in the new era is the kind of socialist, Marxist system, a Leninist state, which China is. That is really the dispensation of the future. So we should not neglect that. That is not just a question of material power. It is also a question of ideological power. We are the model for the rest of the world. We are the model for the developing countries. Because earlier it was, China should be left to do what it wants to. We are not like the others. But now what is being said is that really the Chinese model, the Chinese experience is like an example to a large number of developing countries who also want to develop socially as well as economically. China offers that model.
Mm-hmm. So how much of a concern do you see, and I know it's a point of concern, but how much of it is you think India can solve when it comes to the competition that we see all the time going out, in India's immediate neighborhood? We are seeing what is happening with Sri Lanka. There is Nepal, there is Bangladesh. Now there is this entire gamut of things that has sort of that have unfolded with the vaccine diplomacy. So going forward, do you think that this is going to be an area, and probably this is a pain point that India will learn to live with this, competition going on? There is also another debate going on between, the Belt and Road Initiative and the Blue Dot Network. So how do you see all that, sir?
Yeah. Well, as far as the blue dot network is concerned, we should not look at it as a kind of a alternative to the Belt and Road, because blue dot is essentially these countries, establishing certain benchmarks, certain norms, which must be followed for infrastructure projects, which are being financed by either multilateral development banks or even bilaterally. So it is not that there is an offer of a different kind of a assistance initiative from the Western countries. Of course, at the G7, they have made at least some reference to a Build Back Better, initiative, which seems to suggest that a alternative financing mechanism and an alternative support mechanism is going to be put in place, but no details have been given. How is it going to be financed? Now, the reference was made to private financing, but catalytic investment by the state. Now, will that be anywhere near what China has deployed? And China is in a position to deploy. That's still not very clear. So I don't think we should look at the blue dot as a kind of a alternative to the BRI. Frankly speaking, at this point of time, no country or group of countries has been able to come up with as ambitious a infrastructure development program as China has. We have to accept that. Yes, it is a fact that there are concerns about lack of transparency. There are concerns about debt overload, for example. We have seen what has happened in Sri Lanka. We have seen what has happened in some of the African countries. So those problems are there. But at the moment, we do not have any alternative kind of a initiative of the scale that China has offered. So we have to, number one, recognize what you are up against. Secondly, with regard to our own neighborhood, there is no doubt that we are simply not able to deploy the scale of resources that China is able to in terms of development of infrastructure in these countries. But I would say that even though we may not be able to offer the same kind of resources that China does, we have other kinds of assets with respect to dealing with our neighbors. So no matter what China does, it cannot replicate the kind of very strong people-to-people relationship or the cultural affinity that exists between India and the countries in the region. Right. Even with an adversary like Pakistan, there are still very strong cultural affinities. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, how can we translate what this asset is in terms of influencing also the political relationship between our countries? We have to find some creative kind of diplomacy which is able to help us leverage this in promoting relations with our neighbors. Secondly, the fact is that India is the largest economy amongst the South Asian countries. Its economy is more powerful than all the countries in the region put together. Now, you should be thinking in terms of how India can make itself the engine of growth for the entire neighborhood. There, the fact that you are asymmetrically the most powerful country is actually an advantage, because if you look at it, even if everything that our neighbors produce sold to India, it would still be a small fraction of the Indian market. So actually, you can afford to open up your economy to the countries of the region and become the driver of growth for their economies. Mm-hmm. For that, you need, for example, much better connectivity. Right. Not only physical connectivity, but you need to have connectivity, as I say, software of connectivity. That is, you should be able to promote the easy flow of goods, of people across those borders. So proximity is a great advantage that you have. It's an asset that you possess. So there are many areas where you need not try to, just catch up with China. If China makes a stadium, then I also go and make a stadium. Or if China makes a highway, or I also run and make a highway. Don't try to do the things that China is better at. try and do things that you are better at.
Mhm.
So if you are able to then translate this into a kind of a long-term strategy to really try to consolidate your position within your neighborhood, I still believe that you have more assets than the Chinese have. Now, this would also mean that when you are looking at your engagement with the rest of the world, and when you have limited resources, and particularly at this time, maybe you can think in terms of, prioritizing that maybe my engagement with some other regions of the world may not be as important. Maybe I can redeploy some of those resources to the neighborhood. In terms of our political engagement, can we not try to, further intensify that engagement at each level, not only at the leadership level, but at the level of parliamentarians, at the level of intellectuals, make it a very vibrant kind of a relationship. These are the things which you can do without too much expenditure of resources. So when we say neighborhood first policy, translate that into actual ground reality. That is what is required.
Of course, sir. And what about some of the regional initiatives like the SAARC, the BIMSTEC, BBIN? There are so many of them. Don't you think that we need to now really move forward on that? Or maybe,
I agree with you. We should move ahead on each of these. For example, I have also said that don't look at, for example, BIMSTEC as a kind of a substitute for SAARC, because we want to keep the Pakistanis out. Or that BBIN is preferable because, again, Pakistan is not a part of that. So each of these fora are important in themselves. They have a logic of their own. There is every reason for us to try and invigorate BIMSTEC, because if we have a kind of a stronger relationship between South Asia and Southeast Asia, using Myanmar as a land bridge to ASEAN, then this is something which makes eminent sense for India. Similarly, the BBIN, okay, if we can't move ahead with some of the projects SAARC-wide, let us have, those countries which are willing to join, let's go ahead with those. And that is what BBIN is about. And it has been very successful, for example, in terms of creating a kind of a sub-regional power grid amongst the countries in the region. Also a transportation agreement between the motor vehicles agreement, railway agreement. So it is not that we have not made progress, but I think we have to still recognize that SAARC is important because that's the only forum for the whole subcontinent. And I think India's future lies with being able to integrate the whole subcontinent, rather than to have a division in that, the western part can go somewhere else. No, it won't work like that. So it is in India's interest to keep SAARC not only going, but to reinvigorate SAARC as a regional forum. And only India can lead it. Also, we should be careful that, if we somehow try to distance ourselves from SAARC, China is already an observer in the SAARC.
Right.
Now, there have been, at various points, in fact, proposals that China should be made a full member of SAARC. Now, if we are not there, what stops some of the other countries of actually bringing in China as a full member of SAARC? Then how would you react to that? So there are also some risks involved in somehow distancing ourselves from SAARC.
Sir, and lastly, my most simple, but then I would expect you to give an elaborate answer only you can give. How do you see the future of India-China bilateral ties after all that has happened? We get to hear it's not going to be the same again, but like it or not, they are your neighbors, and they are one of the potential superpowers. So what do you do? What is the future?
No, so I mentioned that the long-term answer to this challenge is precisely that we try very consciously and single-mindedly to try and begin to reduce the power gap between the two countries, because that is what is critical. And one of the reasons why we are facing what we are facing today, whether in Ladakh or in terms of the pressures on us in our neighborhood, is precisely because there is an asymmetry of power between the two sides. So there is no getting away from that. It may seem to be somewhat a complex answer, but I'm afraid we have to accept that. So there must be a kind of a single-minded focus on trying to reduce that gap between our two countries. And as I said, the ingredients, the potential for doing that are there. It is a question of whether or not there is a willingness to take those difficult decisions, which will put us back on a high growth path. Because the Chinese economy is slowing down. You have seen that, China is facing a problem of aging, of diminishing even population. While India is still in the growth phase, it still has some period left of its demographic dividend. So while there is going to be a long-term decline in the Chinese growth rate, inevitably, you are still in a phase where you can sustain a very high growth rate. So you should try and get onto that. Because once you start shrinking that gap, then not only with respect to China, but with respect to your other partners, also you will have greater diplomatic options. That is the lesson I drew from my time as Foreign Secretary during the period 2003 to 2007. Because when we were seen as shrinking the gap, our diplomatic options opened. That is how the nuclear deal became possible. So this is fundamental. And also, you cannot expect anybody else, even your closest friends, to come and fight your war for you. So that has to be your own strength. And during the current time, we have done well to be able to forestall the Chinese. It has been costly. We have had to deploy large amount of forces. We have had to take away some forces from the Pakistan border and redeploy them on the border with China. So we have paid a cost. But we have shown a determination, okay, if we have to pay the cost, we'll pay the cost, but we will not let you, ingress into what we regard as our territory. So that much strength you have displayed. So I do not have any kind of fear that, major kind of war will take place, or that massive amount of, Chinese ingress will take place. I don't think that can happen. But in terms of changing the nature of the relationship, that shrinking of the power gap is necessary. And during this time, what you need to do is to deploy enough forces and the quality of forces that you need to make any ingress from the Chinese side a very costly and risky affair for them. That much you can do, even with reduced strength. So there is maybe a certain rethink of how do we, redeploy our forces at the border, because you need to be able to convey to the other side, if you try this, if you provoke, there will be a cost for you to incur. That much you can, I believe, you can certainly be able to do. But longer term, as I said, you have to have a strategy for trying to progressively reduce the gap. In the meantime, while you are doing that, of course, the external balancing will remain important. Like what we are doing with the Quad or the Indo-Pacific strategy, or trying to, broaden our linkages with the many other regions of the world. That is a sensible strategy. That is what we ought to be doing. So that will continue to be an important component of our strategy. But we have to recognize that at this point of time, because of the setback that we have received during the second wave of the COVID-19, there are certain questions which are being asked outside. Is really India up to it? Is India really a credible partner in terms of an Indo-Pacific strategy? I think these are temporary doubts about India, because I think intrinsic strength of India is very much still there. So I do hope that we can overcome this kind of setback we have received over the next few months.
Sure. On that note, Ambassador Sharan, thank you so much for talking to The Print. You please take care.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.